Welcome to today's webinar. My name is Matt Siddell. I'm joined today by Arthur Johnson and Michelle Lowe. Just going to give you a couple of pointers before we kick off. Your camera and your microphone will remain switched off throughout this webinar, which most of you are probably familiar with. And today's webinar is recorded, and we will publish it on the Qandor website. If not by the end of today, then tomorrow morning. We'll begin shortly. Please feel free to use your Q&A function at the bottom of your screen. If you have any questions, just fire them into the chat. We'll get to as many as we can during the webinar. There's usually some questions at the end of the webinar, and we'll go back and we'll mop up those as well. We're going to try and keep it to a 3 o'clock finish today, but it might be that there's still some points to go through after 3 o'clock, which is fine. That's not the end of the world either. But questions can be asked during the discussions or kept to the end. And join in the conversation as well. We've got a link on LinkedIn so you can get connected to one another. Click the link on the LinkedIn, it's in the chat field. Connect with each other, make connections, say hello to one another. And maybe if you have any questions that aren't answered during the webinar, you can ask them to our experts then. And at the end, there'll be, as I said, there's the Q&A. So I think it's time for you guys to share your slides. I'm just going to introduce the speakers today.
Hi, I hope you're enjoying the free content. My name is Matt Siddell. I started Qandor in 2017. In 2020, we launched a property academy called Tropolis. If you want to know how you can come and join our fantastic network and work with the wonderful people that we help and support, then click the link below and book your call with me today.
So Michelle Lowe is a Qandor member. She's the founding director of Redshell Consulting. She's got 25 years experience of delivering construction projects across all sectors, and from both a contractor and a client side, and she has the delivery skills of both a QS and a project manager. So Redshell specialises in high-end residential refurbishment. Michelle gets involved with some really fancy projects, and to date, you've delivered something like about £400 million worth of GDV in a high-end space in and around London. Arthur Johnson, I think Arthur started his own construction business when he was 23 years old. He's got 10 years experience in London as a construction entrepreneur. He's the managing director at JJ Property, and he's done north of 50 projects delivered. And those are projects from refurbishment and fit out through to luxury new builds and bespoke design and build contracts. So in terms of expertise and ability to share insights, I think it's fair to say that we've got two really good experts today. Last time I heard Michelle speak, you had some great tips on how to strip out some costs at the tender stage by tendering the program and the prelims before tendering the actual scope of work. So I'm looking forward to some more wise tips and knowledge sharing today. But without further ado, over to you, Michelle.
Lovely, thank you, Matt. And welcome everyone to the webinar today. We're going to talk today about how to deliver construction projects smoothly. We're going to talk about some really basic principles, which will hopefully get things operating in a much better way. Construction projects, by their very nature, are incredibly challenging, as we know. Even with everything organised, planned and prepared, projects do fluctuate wildly and they change continuously. There's constant variables and multiple objectives from a huge array of people that are involved in a construction project. There's hundreds of us. So with Arthur on the contractor side and myself on the client side, we both see, experience and suffer from the same issues in project delivery. The challenges to delivering construction projects smoothly are the same on both sides. So we're going to discuss the basic principles which you can place at the right time in the right way will help any project deliver smoothly, but none more so than now with our Brexit and our COVID hangovers, which are also affecting the industry quite wildly. We all know what happens when projects don't run smoothly, don't we? Costs spiral, they go crazy. Time and programs can be stretched beyond imagination. You can't fathom it sometimes. And there's inevitable stress and bond fights, which just make it really difficult. So we really want to move away from that, don't we? And try and get things operating in a much better way.
We do, yeah. So Michelle and myself have got 35 years experience of delivering high-end projects, and we've seen the projects that have run on schedule, and we've seen the ones that rarely, but happens, they're ahead of schedule, and we're in front of that. And we've seen the ones that have missed the schedule, gone a long way behind, and some that are extremely well delayed. And what we want to do today really is just draw on our experience between us, because we share the same issues, and actually educate or remind you guys of those issues, so that when you're doing your project, you can take that education into that, with the sole aim purely of saving time, money, and cost and stress, of course. We think it's quite common actually nowadays for these projects to, for these items to be overlooked. We think when it comes to the development appraisal of projects, it's not always looked into in terms of focusing on these items and getting them knocked down. So again, we want to eliminate that luck factor of when you get towards the end of a project, you look back and say, oh, wasn't that lucky we had a good build, or wasn't it lucky that this happened? What we want to do today is eliminate that completely so that it's managed out properly. So over to the topics of the day.
Sounds like your cursor's stuck.
Yeah, sorry, my screen is flipping to the next page.
There we go.
Sorry.
Okay.
We've got quite, I'm just looking down the names, guys. We've got some quite experienced developers here. Most of the names I recognise, and most of them have, delivered multiple projects. So don't be shy on the level of content that you go to.
Brilliant. Okay, thank you.
Great.
Okay.
So 4 topics for today. We've got a big one, big one is the design. So getting the design locked down. And we're going to move on to the various elements of the professional team, who you should be putting in your professional team and focusing on. The importance of programs, pre-construction programs, and the build program. And then the last one, which is paying people on time, the importance of that, all the way from your professional side and the delivery side through to the contractors, subcontractors, and filtering down, the importance of paying people properly and paying them on time. So we'll start with big one, which is design. So define design. Okay, so design is not just what you see in magazines and see on Instagram and what you see winning design awards. That is an element of the design. What we're focusing on here is the technical aspect of the design, so past RIBA stage 3, and the issue of that is only purely through construction drawings. So it's making sure that the issuing of construction drawings and technical design is delivered on time, in full, and accurately. So
If I just jump in, Arthur. I mean,
yeah.
Having had a look at some of the attendees today, developers will typically try and save money and cut costs and what have you. Construction drawings is probably the first thing they'll attempt to cut, and one of the first things they'll regret cutting once they realize that they really needed them. Is that something you see quite often? How often do you say to a client, you really do need construction drawings, and the client says, oh, I don't want to spend another 10 grand, so we're not going to do that?
Yeah, so what you've basically done there, Matt, is summarise the whole talk of today. It's to make sure, what it is to make sure exactly that they don't skimp on that.
Yeah.
And they don't, and also it leads from the design onto the professional team, that those costs in a development appraisal are not ignored. So they'll look at the land cost, they'll look at the sales figures, they'll look at the build cost, but sometimes the professional fees and the design input get seen as maybe a secondary cost that they can save on. What we're saying today is actually focus on that and make that cost as important as all the other costs.
Absolutely.
And by investing in that early and doing that in the right manner, you should reap the rewards at the end, hopefully, and save some of the big issues that are involved in not having it. So we'll absolutely come on to that, yeah.
Yeah, it's surprising as well, the amount of people that don't understand necessarily what construction drawings are. Many people think they get to stage 3 or stage 4 and they can, that's their project. And it's really not. There's a whole extra level of construction technical information needed for a builder to actually build it. And we're trying to emphasize that, no, let's actually do that. Let's get all that information really early on so that we can really nail down the project and deliver it smoothly. So yeah, let's remind everyone about construction drawings.
Absolutely. Moving on to the design team, full design team to be appointed early. So who are the design team? So on projects of all sizes, the design team is at least the client, the architect, and the structural engineer. When projects get a bit bigger, a bit more complex, then there's various different design consultants that can come into that. Interiors, lighting, AV, and of course the contractor design. One thing we say with that is don't always go for the cheapest route. Don't go for the kind of obvious route of potentially someone you've used before, because actually the person you've used before might not be relevant to this project now. Get a project team together who are relevant to the project that you're doing. I know it sounds really obvious, but it's so important. And it's good for teams that work together. So structural engineer that's worked with an architect, has worked with various consultants. If you can jump in and become a client and use their whole team, that's going to save things in terms of cost and time as well. And then on to the third point, design must be as complete as possible before tendering, procuring, or starting on the site. This is by far I think, the most important thing in terms of making sure there's smooth delivery right from the beginning. Don't wait until things have started on site or until things are further down the line before items are designed. Work really hard with your team to get that design in ideally before tendering. It means that your contractors who tender back are all on the same wavelength and you're getting the same price. So that's a huge one. And that links neatly into specifications and the full coordination of the design. Make sure the specs are accurate, and Michelle's got some more to say on that, but make sure they're accurate and detailed. And it just means that when you're getting tenders, everyone's pricing apples for apples on the same thing. It's so important. So I'll pass over to Michelle for some more on that.
Yeah, thank you. I obviously completely wholeheartedly agree with all of these points. Design to be complete as possible, a full design team to be appointed early. One thing that gets overlooked on this is about subcontractor and main contractor design elements. So you obviously think the architects and the engineers, we've got a scheme, we've got a drawing. Depending on the form of contract, depends on then who does some of the detailed design and some of the elements, so contractor design portions. And all too often, even on some of my projects now, the main contractor who's responsible for that element and therefore responsible for the design, I'll be like, where's the design? And they're like, we don't need it yet. And I'm like, we really do, we really do. We need to coordinate this through all of the project. And if we don't do it timely and, comprehensively, ultimately the client ends up accepting something that they may not have wanted to have accepted. So distribution routes and, trickeries like that. So I'd really like to emphasise about subcontractor and main contractor design being done early as well, because it will make it all smoother. With specifications, Nbs Architect Specifications used to be a norm, they used to be a standard, and now they're not. I don't know where they've gone. So I find myself asking for them and enforcing that. Come on, architects, please, I want an Nbs specification as well. The reason why is if you don't have it, you don't have all of the detail, you don't have the wall build-ups or the statutory obligations that you're committing to. And therefore, the contractor may build perhaps what they built last time or what they normally do. It's not quite what's expected or wanted for the project. So it's ambiguous. And then, that leads to all of the bun fights, doesn't it? So specifications, we really want to drill down, don't we? This whole design early is really pertinent right now as well with what's going on in the current climate, with the Brexit hangover and the COVID hangover. We're all very aware of material shortages now. We've got timber, plaster, steel, everything is either on a very, very long leading time or incredibly expensive. I read this week that there is no new timber coming into the country that hasn't already been procured and allocated. So we've got no spare. So if you haven't procured early, you're going to suffer and struggle on your project. You can't procure early unless you've designed it. So we're going to have to really work back and start these processes much, much earlier to be able to still deliver smoothly in the current climate.
Can I make an observation on that previous slide that we were just on? A lot of the shortcutting comes from a mentality that sort of says the sooner we start, but the sooner we finish. And I imagine you're going to discuss this in the program, but it's just not like that, is it?
Not true. No, it doesn't work. It doesn't work.
It's the opposite.
Tried it. I tried it a couple of times. It definitely doesn't work.
No, it's the opposite. It's one of the slides further down is programming, and we're going to say about the focus on the pre-construction program and getting all of that information in as soon as you can. That is so key. And the attitude of buying a site and wanting to get on site as quickly as you can really have disastrous kind of consequences out the other end. So that's the purpose of that, absolutely.
Yeah, you end up just chasing your tail, and you can't do that in something quite as trickery as construction, I don't think. Oh, sorry, I slipped over. Sorry. I may be able to build things, but I can't handle this very well. Sorry.
No problem. And that's the end of the presentation.
Sorry, I need to get back to my slide.
You need to go back about.
Sorry, there we go. So yeah, moving swiftly on to professional teams. So we've just spoken about design, and much like design, a professional team really needs to be brought on board early, much like designers need to be brought on board early. And it's all the same importance and things that we should think about. The professional team obviously is more than just the project manager and the architect, depending on the breadth and width of the project, depends on the design team that's going to be there. Now, I've lost my way, haven't I? What I will say about appointing the professional team early is that you are going to be exposed perhaps to some cost and maybe some cost risks earlier on in the project than you'd expect. So you may then have to pay for the professional team before your first drawdown. You may have to then pay for things possibly at risk. But if you don't make that commitment earlier in the project, you're not going to have all the information that you need, the strategy, the procurement routes, the design, and all those kind of things that you're going to need to then really set up the project well. Also, this is something about as a result of us talking, is about the defined roles and responsibilities for the project professional team. Now, you think that this would just be a given and that you'd know, but it's not the case. Different projects are delivered in different ways, so different contractual routes and different experience of the project team and of the employer or the client themselves will dictate the roles and responsibilities that each people do. So it's really important at the beginning of each project that that is actually set up and really defined. And that also, sometimes the client and the employer needs to have their roles defined for them. That really falls on the shoulder, of the EA, the CA and the PM to lead the client on that and to make sure that they're fully up to speed so that decisions and objectives can be completed in a timely manner. And that brings us on to our last little point, actually, which is a little bit controversial. I wouldn't necessarily have said this so boldly, but I do agree with this. Should an architect be appointed as contract administrator as well? And I don't think they should. I think that's a flat no, actually, on construction project delivery. The reason why is that the CA, EA or project manager needs to have the central point and the overview over the whole project, looking at it from all of the objectives to push it forward. If the architect is a contract administrator, obviously coming from the architectural side, we're not fully aware of everyone else's objectives or restrictions that are going on, let alone the contractual understanding that's needed to deliver the contract to make sure that everyone is protected.
I guess there's a risk as well. If your architect's, excuse my French, but if your architect's a bit shit, then your contract administrator is also going to end up a bit rubbish. So splitting those roles has got its merits, but not every. I mean, it depends on the size of the project, right? If you get to a £500,000 contract sum and north of that, then is there a tipping point where you might go for a separate contract administrator, or would you just say like on all projects separate the roles?
It does depend on the size and the scale. I mean, a project I've done not too long ago, it was around £700,000 mark contract. And when we went into the job, the architect was the CA, and we actually sat down with the client and explained from previous experience why that can't work. And we gave them the pros and cons. Couldn't give them any pros, gave them quite a lot of cons, and basically said, employ an independent CA. It's going to save headaches. And like you say, if the architect's not doing a particularly good job with a few elements, then when there's a CA whose role is to be impartial in that position, it's very difficult for them to say, oh yeah, we were wrong and you were right. So it's somebody sitting as an umpire in a tennis match, but they're very much on one person's side. it should be an impartial position. Yeah. And I think for small roles, for small projects and smaller ones under the million mark, 500,000-600,000, for a reasonably sensible fee, you can get an independent CA.
You can get obviously a QS that delivers CA alongside it as well.
Yeah.
So there's a streamline there. But the risk, I think, as well, is not just that it's going to make the project more tricky, but there's some real contractual health and safety, some quite damning risks if the CA role isn't delivered properly and robustly. It leaves the client, the project and the team exposed, I think. So it does need to be taken a bit more seriously, I think.
Absolutely.
I guess you end up in a situation where if the architect is also the contract administrator and it's the architect who's being a bit slow, then the liability is not being parked with the right party.
Yeah,
and the client's not getting the extension of time that they need, or the contractor's not getting what they need. Okay, that's a good point.
That's a very, very important point. And I've a number of years ago, I've been in that situation where the architect's been the CA and we were getting treated unfairly because of it. And from that moment on, I kind of thought, I want to tell people not to do that. So here we go. So back to the professional team. From my point of view, professional team, obviously you've got the architect, structural engineer, interior designers, that side of things. The important ones I would value, and this is projects kind of a bit higher up of $1 million plus, is have a cost consultant, definitely have regular cost meetings. So all the time throughout the project, everybody's on top of the costs. There's nothing hidden, it's all discussed the whole time. So cost consultant QS. If the client doesn't want to be too hands-on, employ a client representative, employees agent to manage it for them on a day-to-day basis. I think that's key, to be honest. And then moving on from that, there's a whole variety. There's hundreds and hundreds of different professionals that can be involved. But those main ones, I think, are very worth taking note of. And then back to defining roles and responsibilities as well, the third point. Make sure everybody in the professional team understands their contractual roles and responsibilities. We've both been in projects where towards the end of the projects, the clients haven't actually understood what their role and responsibility necessarily is. So make sure that is clear and led from the front. Before the contract starts, sit around, get around the table, discuss roles and responsibilities and all the various different elements. I think that's key. Things like methods of communication, reporting, approvals, decision-making, drawing management, drawing maintenance, who issues drawings and what sequence. All these things shouldn't be discovered and negotiated throughout the job. It should be agreed before the job starts. And it sounds really, really basic saying that, but it does amaze us at how many projects that doesn't happen. So get on top of that. In terms of the contractual roles and responsibilities, as a client, learn where your roles are, because it's crucially important. Moving on to the third point, so programs. Programs are really important. Pre-construction program as important as the construction program. So normally people think of a construction program as when you start the project day one and when you finish. And it's a kind of bar chart of that time. What we're saying is focus on the pre-construction program, which is the period that gets all of the information in place to that stage. Really value that and put time, effort and resources into that. That includes surveys, investigations, planning condition reviews, pre-start coordination, and a big one at the moment is procurement of long lead time items. So if you've got a 7-month program and there's something that's on a 3-month long lead-in period, procure that 2-3 months before you start the project. Don't start procuring that month 1 and 2 because it's going to delay things. So get on top of all of that. And on that note, a competent contractor will issue you with a pre-construction RFI log with a kind of risk register. Work with your team to go through that. Get your
RFI being request for information, right?
Yeah, request for information. So it's basically a neat way of asking questions in a contractual manner. So you list your questions on an RFI log, and that then gets dispersed between the team. The client then needs to take that information and employ their professional team and their design team to help get solutions to those answers. So it's important to focus on those things.
And it's tracked and recorded as well, the dates and things, isn't it? So then it's a recourse for delay. If a delay occurs and you can prove that your RFI was asked and not answered, then it apportions where the delay came from. So it's a very good tracking document, isn't it?
Yeah. And it's a crucial part and a very useful tool for managing construction projects and getting answers. So pay attention to those and have a good team around you who can really employ that.
Okay, yeah, so on programs as well, pre-construction program, absolutely. It's not something that I think is given enough credibility or credence as to how important it actually is in the delivery of a program or a construction project. Everyone focuses obviously on the delivery program and how quickly they're going to build something, but we really want to give importance to that 6, 12, maybe 2 years, that period of time before delivery, where we can get everything in order and really do all the important things that we need to do. So one of my projects, it's quite a small project, it's only £1.3 million refurb in London. It took us 2 years to get onto site, from my first site visit until we've got onto site. But it is wholly and fully defined and designed, and I'm fully expecting it to run as smooth as it can. No issues at all, because we spent that time up front. So it's really important to kind of emphasise that. Yeah, we want to be wise and not hopeful with our construction periods as well. Again, everyone gets very excited all about delivering things very quickly for all of the obvious reasons, but we need to be really kind of realist about it, I think. Programs can be shortened. I've got a construction project where I've saved 10 weeks off the program by changing from concrete frame to steel frame. 10 weeks saving, brilliant. But we were being very realistic about it in the first place. So programs can be manoeuvred and you can change them, but you've got to be realistic first, definitely. and particularly with the market going on at the minute with materials. We're going to keep reiterating it because it's not something we've experienced, quite so globally as we are at the minute. Things are going to take longer, deliveries are going to be, longer leading times. And we really have to factor it all in, being very realistic about where we're at. Any construction programs from last year, you probably just want to ditch and do a new one for now. Do a new one for this year and be realistic about where we are in the industry. Yeah.
We've got a few questions that have come in. Do you want to try and rattle off a couple of these just quickly?
Yeah,
someone's asked about cladding. Cladding's quite a topic at the moment. The question is, given the massive issues around cladding, what should we be considering if we are cladding a project that won't land us in hot water once complete?
Okay. Oh, I'm doing the same actually. I've got that going on at Stratford at the minute. I've got cladding only to the penthouse, luckily. But we've appointed, obviously, building control, but a separate fire officer straight away. And then we've designed to all of the high specifications that we could do that were perhaps over and above. The real important thing here is the EWS1 surveyor form insurance indemnity that's come out. It's a new thing by the RICS, and an independent advisor has to come check your designs, check your technicalities, check the construction, and then at the end sign it off. And that's really being pushed from mortgage companies and insurers and funders, but actually will become an industry standard. It will become statutory. So if you're looking at cladding, you definitely want to put those things on board, I think.
But as a developer, you're suggesting independent fire consultancy.
Oh, absolutely. I won't project manage a project that's, over 18 metres without one. I wouldn't, so absolutely.
Fair enough. I've got another question here, Michelle and Arthur. It's from Kieran Forrestal. Architectural role and the client role, WRT to CDM. Many instances, the clients do not understand that their responsibilities, WRT to CDM. How do you manage this?
I mean, principal designer and principal design advisor, because CDMs obviously is not around anymore since it got changed to principal design advisor, but that was a separate role. And now the architect can be principal design advisor. And on smaller projects, sometimes that's okay. But again, it depends on the kind of size and scale, because they're taking overall responsibility of health and safety for that whole delivery. And an architect's really best placed for that. They might not be, depending on the size and scale. If it's a refurb, maybe. But again, on my projects that are a bit larger, I have a separate principal design advisor. So a separate.
Yeah, I mean, I know you're hot on this, Arthur, because I went around a couple of your sites not so long ago, and everything was battened down very seriously.
Yeah, it's crucially important nowadays. There's no cutting corners with any of it. You have to be on top of your CDM stuff, your health and safety, your COVID restrictions. All these things have to be aligned, and we'll have fortnightly health and safety checks. So we'll get a health and safety consultant in who we pay. He does a fortnightly visit and he does a report saying you've improved on this. This needs a bit of work, and over the course of the project, and that will come on to some, the prelims that we'll speak about on the next one. That is a case of a prelim, which is so important.
Are those inspections by your consultant unannounced?
No, they're not. But
you tip off all your guys who's coming round, and but
no,
your guys didn't know we were coming round, and they worked hard. That's on, and it was all.
Yeah, I mean, to be honest, they're employed by us, so we pay them. So we are their clients, so we know when they're coming. But we don't have time every 2 weeks to completely redo all the health and safety, because we've got
no. But the council are turning up unannounced, aren't they, and issuing fines?
Yeah, to HSE if there's any issues reported on site. We had a situation 2 years ago where somebody injured his back on site quite badly, and he called the HSE. And the next morning, we had 4 HSE officers turning up to site, which is kind of what you get when there's a death on site. And they did an absolutely brutal report on the job, and we passed it, and we passed it quite well. So putting that in place is so important. I mean, if our health and safety had failed, and that guy that injured his back, it could have been a very different story.
Well, I mean, your insurance is definitely going one direction only. Kieran's chipped back in and says he agrees, but clients need to be aware of their responsibility. In many cases, they do not. Would you agree with that?
Definitely.
Yeah.
Definitely. Yeah. It's a huge thing. It's a huge thing with client responsibilities when they sign a contract. Obviously, it depends completely on the contract, but a JCT intermediate contract, the client themselves are so responsible for a lot of items, and they often think that when they sign the contract, it's over to the architect and the contractor to do everything. They actually don't often understand what their obligations are. and educating themselves and getting advice on that early on at the beginning of the process is just so important. And it prevents confusion, disputes and stress and stuff later on, definitely.
Yeah, absolutely. Things get missed, don't they? If the clients, everyone's expecting someone to do it, they don't know they're supposed to do it, something's being missed and dropped, and then you've got a problem. So again, up to the EA, CA and PM to push that client and make sure they're fully up to speed with what's expected of them in the nicest possible way.
There's another question here from Peter Russell, which is relevant to the previous slide. When do you think is the correct time in the pre-construction phase to appoint the principal contractor? I often find after a stage 3 design tender is too late. The design is developed, but often not coordinated. Do you think a second stage is better approach? Like at what stage do you get the contractor in? Because the contractor is going to want to value engineer things and try and reduce the cost and what have you.
Depends on your form of procurement. You can do either, but it depends on your form of procurement, definitely, and what your objectives are. If you want to negotiate with the contractor, or do the 2-stage that I spoke about when we did our last Q&A session, then you absolutely get on board early, very, very early, even at inception, and you negotiate as a partner the whole way through. And I'm sure you do projects like that. Definitely. But if you're competitive tendering, then it's 3, 4, stage Reba, stage 3 and 4, definitely. And then the following design from that is contractor responsibility later.
One thing I'd say with that as well, in terms of cost, purely cost-wise, it's sometimes a good idea to get a contractor in early and negotiate with them in terms of the value engineering as you go along. We had a project recently which we lost out on because we were too expensive for the budget, but all the other 3 people who tendered, 3 companies, were all too expensive by the same amount. And actually we looked at it and we said if we were involved earlier, we could have actually value engineered it from the design stage up, which I think should be very attractive for clients and end users.
And Arthur, is that simply because the contractor is closer to the suppliers and they know what's happening with prices and things like that?
I think so, yeah.
Or because you're actually the guys who are building it and you're spending a lot more time with the materials than the person who's sitting at the desk and, trying to finish their report.
Yeah, I agree. I think it's both. And I think actually the amount of stuff that we build and we think, oh, we could actually save so much time building it this different way, but we don't build it that way because it's not what's been designed. And because we're into the program, we can offer that up as a design change. That's time and cost and everything. And sometimes it's better then to just build it. Whereas if we were involved much earlier on, we could advise on a different technique and a different manner in which to, basements is a big one, and piling, things like that. And working with engineers and drawing experience from the 5, 6, 7 structural engineers we've worked with over the last 2 years to actually say to an engineer, this is a different way we've done it to save cost and time. What do you think? And it probably goes back to Michelle's point on the structure and the frame and saving 10 weeks.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's that exact thing.
Yeah. It's getting everyone to work a bit closer together, isn't it? The designers and the contractors almost. Yeah. Then you can just, smooth that out.
All right, I'm going to hold it there with the questions for now because they're coming in steadily. I'll let you guys crack on.
We're almost finished, actually. Thank you. So our last slide actually was something that I was feeling quite excited about recently, quite opinionated about. It's paying down bills. It's the subject of an article that I've written for the next Qandor magazine as well. So you'll see this reiterated when you read the article. Ultimately, this causes so many problems that we just don't need to have. Late payments cause delays. End of. Absolutely. Cash flow is king, and it's king for everyone. I spend an inordinate amount of time chasing late payments through and then strategizing and overcoming the issues in both the project delivery and the project team that the late payments have caused. We don't need to do that. We don't. The industry is very well funded. We are awash with funding. Projects, have the funding agreed. It's all there in place. We really need to let the cash flow and let it flow at the right places at the right time. Also, again, none more so than now with the advance payments that's now required in the project. So before we'd have to pay for goods and materials, maybe as they arrived on site, we might have to pay some advance deposits for lifts and unusual items. I'm seeing increasingly more and more and more advance payments required for project delivery. And this is securing raw materials now and then allocating manufacturing slots and then, the design, and then eventually the materials will get to site. By the time they've got to site, we've probably already paid for them. And this is new, this is increasing. This is as a result of the Brexit and the COVID situation, I am sure. So we all need to be very aware of that cash flow increase in early stages of the project that perhaps wasn't there before. And we need to allow that cash flow to go to get the project to still work as it should. Prelims, I'm very much going to leave that one to Arthur, actually, to have a big chat on prelims for project delivery. My last little comment was also pay your professional team on time, please. I'm sure I'm speaking for all architects, all professional team and all consultants, which do sometimes get left behind. So that.
Absolutely. I think everything Michelle said, it's very simple, from the smallest projects all the way up to the big ones. Pay people on time. You know, if a bill goes in, and if there's an issue or a problem with your own cash flow, sit down and talk about it and explain that and see if you can come up with a plan together rather than ignoring it. It's so crucial. I just want to make an important point on prelim charges, because we often get told, and contractors often get told, that prelims are so expensive. Why do they cost so much? Prelims are the cost of administering a project and providing general plant, site staff facilities and site-based services that are not part of the rates. So it sits separately to the contract rates. It's part of the contract, but the whole point of prelim charges is they're not a penalty. They're not put in as a money-making idea. You know, they are there to fund the contractor so they can manage the job effectively. This goes back to roles and responsibilities. If projects are extended by a certain amount of time and you're issued with an extension of time as a contractor through no fault of your own, prelim charges will continue. And it's important, not in all cases, but in most cases, the prelims for the contractor will need to be paid to keep the project going. And it comes back to kind of getting advice and learning that as a client or as a developer early on. And then you might work as hard as you can to limit the project being delayed, which is going to cost you more money. But contractors absolutely need prelims. If there's no prelims and they get that pulled from under their feet, irrespective of the size of the contractor, it's like taking the engine out of a car. You know, it's going to leave problems, and the car's going to stall. So just be aware of that and think of it as a very serious kind of item.
One of the guys has asked a question, Simon Meekles. He says, if advanced payments are becoming the norm, does that mean the contractor uses client money and not trade credit to procure materials? First of all, are advanced payments becoming the norm? I mean, the builder's always going to try and ask you to, as the client, to put down a 10% deposit and then pay bills in advance. But if the client knows what they're doing, that's the first thing they're going to block him on, isn't it?
Yeah, they're not coming from the contractor. They're coming from the suppliers or the subcontractors. So
advance payments from suppliers. Okay.
Yeah, and it's coming up through the main contractor via the valuation to the client. So it is the client having to pay for it ultimately. So they'll be paying 3 months in advance for, I don't know, for the steel frame, by paying the deposits to secure the materials. They're paying 6 weeks in advance for the windows before they're even manufactured or on site. And you can see where that risk is then. Clients paying for something from the funding they don't have. So you obviously need the vesting certificates, but vesting certificates with the materials off site, they're not even made yet. So we've got a big increase in this kind of operation. There are ways to manage it, speak to your QS and get it sorted. But I'm finding it increasingly common to have to pay deposits to secure materials and supplies, which we wouldn't normally have to do before.
Yeah, it's changed. It's changed massively since the beginning of COVID. So in the last year and a half, some of the deposits now that suppliers are asking us for, it blows your mind. You know, we've ordered a load of glazing recently, and they want, over the stages of placing the order, design, getting the order to site, they're like 85% or 90% of the money before they've even arrived on site to be delivered. Non-negotiable, part of their T's and C's, and Absolutely. This is happening more and more now. So that's the point of making sure as a client that funding is all in place, because normally the drawdown would only happen once the glazing's in. You could then draw down on that. So it's getting the sequence of that. Just being aware of it so that you've got the cash.
I don't like the sound of that, though. I mean, as the developer, as the client, you kind of lose a lot of leverage, don't you? If you've already coughed up all the money and then you're just beholden to them. If there are delays and things drag on.
Yeah, there is risks, of course there is, but again, there's ways that you can manage it under the contract to protect everyone. The biggest risk is that the supply goes bust with all of your money and you don't have your windows, of course, but there are ways and means that can be managed, and it is a risk, but it's almost like we have to change the attitude a little bit, where it's like you can't hold all the money in your bank when actually the project is live and running. We need to feed the project, and although the parameters are changing and the way that it's delivered is changing, we need to feed the project at the appropriate time to make it work. So it has to be managed, doesn't it? It does.
What are the best ways of managing it? Can you put in service level agreements and delivery times, or can you use a credit card so that if they go bust, you can get your money back?
You can
What are
use
the best ways?
bonds. Yeah, you can use bonds. So there are kind of indemnity insurances and bonds and certificates, absolutely. So that you can then put those in place. It's almost covered by an insurance situation.
Yeah.
Using suppliers that you've used before, do your credit checks on your suppliers before you pay them anything, all of that kind of normal stuff. Yeah. But it's becoming more and more common, definitely.
Okay.
Okay, so yeah, just in summary then.
So in summary, briefly, so we've been over design, the importance of that, getting that in early is key. Professional team, investing in a good, full professional team and getting them in early. Pre and during construction program, and of course, paying your bills. So the summary really is that all of the work should be done, as Michelle said with her project, all of the work should be done before things start on site. Once things start on site, it should just be a case of, right, here you go, contractor, on you go. And things crop up and things change and bits and bobs, but the legwork and the paperwork and the information should already have been done. And that is so key to getting a smooth project run. And then for me, it's basically just, if you don't do that and you avoid to do that, be aware of the risk. Be aware of delays, disruption, abortive works, huge cost increases, potentially variations, and then of course, extensions of time, legal fees, disputes, all these things if it's not properly done in the way that we've said. And it's avoidable. It just takes a bit more cost and a bit more time up front. And then finally from me, before I hand over to Michelle, just to conclude, it's an ever-growing topic, especially since COVID, and mental health, and the importance of mental health within my business as a contractor, my employees, my staff, my guys working. I want to look after them mentally, and I want to look after my own mental health. And actually, if projects run smoother and they're better managed up front, there's less stress, there doesn't need to be the amount of stress that's surrounded by on these projects. And you can really de-risk that and get rid of that early if you follow what we said. And ultimately, if everyone is in a better mindset in the workplace, it's better for everybody. And that's key as well.
It's more fun, isn't it?
It's more fun.
It should be more fun. I totally agree with the mental health aspect, actually. Having worked in the industry for all of these years, I have seen projects in the industry bring people to their knees. It really has. So mental health in construction is now a really pertinent point. It's as a result of the pandemic as well. We've all realised that work-life balance is what everyone needs. It's much better in all these ways. If your project's not going well, you're not going to get that. You're just not going to get that. It's going to be an absolute nightmare. So yeah, the simple, very clear, like none of this is new. None of what we have spoken about today has been unheard of before. This is not new news for anyone. But we're really emphasising and underpinning just how important they are. If we bring them forward and do them early and do them completely, instead of kind of designing and building on the hoof, that everything will just run much smoother. And then everyone saves money, everyone saves time. It's a nicer place to be. And then we can just get with building cool stuff, can't we? So yeah, as simple as that.
Yeah.
And that's all from us, Matt. Thank you.
I think if you add up the time and the energy, I mean, I've done projects that have gone really smoothly. I've just rocked up on site once a fortnight, had a look around, asked one member of the team a short number of questions and walked off again. And it all just goes really well. And then, you know, this place, I dragged the builder out of the pub 3 Monday mornings on the trot. It was a nightmare, but got it done in the end. But once you add up the time and the energy and the stress, and you know, there's a lot of cost to be saved there just by setting these things up properly. John Priest makes a good point. He says, in respect of employing the design team and also getting the construction drawings developed early, brackets or at all, would you agree that you should advise the client that these are investments, not costs, and that the earlier you invest, the greater your return?
Absolutely.
That's a good way of summarising it.
Great terminology.
That's it. That's exactly it. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it's even better than investments. If you go down that path where you do them and that path where you don't do them, it's cheaper ultimately to actually do them.
Yeah.
Of course, you'll both be aware that you get to the end of the project and when the client standing there and says, well, you know what, it all went so smoothly, I really don't know why we needed your help. You're like, well, it went smoothly because you had my help, actually. Here's my final invoice. One more question here from Lee Moffat is asking about value engineering. How can clients typically engage in value engineering? What are the high level value engineering exercises that people do to reduce costs?
My only word on that is it needs to be comprehensive with everyone in it. I get value engineering from one side, and then it obviously can't work because of the other side. It's like if you're value engineering a project, you want the whole team sat around the table doing it together. So the architect, the client, the contractor, the M&E, and the structural, and anyone else that's got part of it, QS obviously, but get everyone around the table to do it effectively.
Yeah.
Otherwise, it's a bit short term.
I think if exactly that, and if a project's tendered and it goes out, ask for a value engineering schedule or recommendations from the contractor. So when they submit their tender price, they also submit a value engineering schedule of what they could recommend with that, with some ideas of cost savings with parameters. And from that, once a contractor's selected, you can then sit around a whole design team meeting with the contractor and really hone down those value engineering skills and kind of go back to cost savings that way, definitely.
Hi, I hope you're enjoying the free content. My name is Matt Siddell. I started Qandor in 2017. In 2020, we launched a property academy called Tropolis. If you want to know how you can come and join our fantastic network and work with the wonderful people that we help and support, then click the link below and book your call with me today.
All right, we've got some good questions coming through now and lots of engagement. I've just got a couple of announcements before we get onto the Q&A and wrap up for today. We've still got 10 minutes. Just to reiterate, the webinar has been recorded and you'll be able to watch it on the free training page on the Qandor website. And at the same time, if you are interested in speaking to either of our experts today, I've shared links to their websites in the chat, but you could just email info@qandor.org. We'll happily put you in touch with either Arthur or Michelle, or you can contact them via LinkedIn. We've got the LinkedIn chat, and the link to the LinkedIn chat is live as well. If you're interested in joining Qandor or Tropolis, Qandor is our club, which is exclusively for business owners who are already doing new build multi-unit developments above £1 million, and Tropolis is the academy where you can learn everything you need to know to help you get started or to scale. Most of the people on Tropolis are actually within the industry. Lots of them have their own construction business, or they're architects or accountants or what have you, and they want to learn about joint ventures and what strategy does work and what strategies are a load of hot air, and that's kind of what Tropolis is there for. But we've got some more questions just coming through here. Let's see if I can pick off a couple of good ones. Someone was asking, is there a formula to use or a factor to calculate market delays, or is it a bit of a guesstimate at this stage? So they're talking about things taking longer. Are you adding like 20%, or I suppose it needs to be a bit more specific, doesn't it?
Yeah, you've got to drill it down into more detail than that, definitely. So you've got to consider what your elements to your project are. So if you've got steel, you need to look at steel in its own right and exactly what's going on with that and factor that in. So there's not a global, you know, percentage that we can add to things to accommodate it. You can increase your contingency, which is probably wise, but you need to look at the detail of your project and what it actually involves. You know, you might not have any steel, so yeah.
That's it, and I think it's very important to mention it's an ever-changing marketplace at the moment. Like, it's changing daily throughout the world in terms of timber, as Michelle mentioned. So the kind of global blanket thing you can do is just up your contingency from the beginning. If you allow double the contingency you might have done before, just as a general thing, certainly worth doing.
Okay, Peter Russell makes a good point. He says, not a question, but remember a quote I heard recently: "A project never finishes late; it's just started too early." This is great. He says, "Great presentation, and thank you." Got another question here from Genevieve Hughes. She says, regarding the lack of NBS, which I totally agree with, it seems to be dying art. Do you think it's because clients don't understand their value and don't want to pay architects to produce? Is NBS National Building Standards?
It is, yeah, and it's an architectural produced specification. It's, it's a program that you then submit the clauses or select the clauses, much like you do a contract. I totally agree. It's the fee. I think it's the fee from the architect to perhaps the client that's saying, no, this is because it's very labour intensive. It's got such value to it, so I'm insisting they're all done on my projects. So yeah, let's all rise the NBS again.
Yeah, I mean, Arthur, as a builder, when you see that there's no construction drawings, it just gives the builder far too much wriggle room on everything, right? And
it does. It does. They can, in essence, they've got a license to do what they want, really, to some extent, and it's not the way it should be. I mean, that will happen for smaller jobs. So 100,000 to 300,000-400,000 projects, it's very, very common not to have full construction drawings. We would encourage that more on those size jobs, but that will happen. If that's the case, just go with reputation of the best possible builders you can find, go off their previous works, inspect their previous works, and those kind of things. But as soon as you're getting up to contracts of 1 million to kind of 5-6 million, you absolutely have to have construction drawings. Yeah.
It reminds me of a conversation I actually had in this room after I bought this house. They'd stripped everything out because I insisted they stripped it out as soon as I bought it because it was going to save me time, which it didn't. And it was about my 16th project, I think, or maybe my 15th. But anyway, I've done loads of refurbs and they'd all gone pretty smoothly. But the guys sat around the table in this room here and they said, right, well, you know, your scope of works, and they just changed everything. And I didn't have any construction drawings. I didn't have any architects. The architect, he was gone. And if I knew then what I knew now, I'd have done things very differently.
Yeah. So one thing with that relates to my point earlier on, is you can be lucky. You can be really lucky and get a great builder who's amazing and nothing's too much problem and they just build everything. But you can't rely on that luck. So what we're saying to people is just eliminate that risk of it being a lucky project and get all the information early.
Well, not just that. I mean, you'll be up against firms bidding on expensive jobs in London, and they'll buy the job in, bid so that they break even or even make a small loss. They know there's going to be a load of variations. They know there's going to be a load of extensions of time. They haven't been asked to submit their rates, and all that stuff comes in, and it's full whack, right? And that's where they make their money.
And that does happen. There are a lot of bad people out there who will take advantage of situations and manipulate certain situations. It's not the way it should be done. But if you focus on the professional team and get that professional team in early and get, as we mentioned, get the 3 or 4 people you need, that'll eliminate and just flush all of that stuff. So,
exactly
it doesn't happen. Yeah,
it's
I had it with
professional team. It does.
I had it with someone bought a house in Chelsea and they were putting a basement under it, and they were a friend of mine, and they'd gone to a well-known basement company and said, yep, whole job 400 grand plus VAT. And the client had even gone and got the references from other clients, and one of the references even came back and said, yeah, they were great builders, really good. I don't know how we went from 400 grand to 1.6 million, but anyway, the house is great, we're really happy. And I said, you've got no construction drawings, you don't need to engage them at this stage. But it's because it was a basement, people go running off looking for basement firms because they think because they're doing a basement they need a basement firm, but really you should start with a contractor. He'll go and get the basement people in. But it's another common mistake I've come across. Scott Watkins here says, hi, Scott Watkins from Caliber Developments. Good plug, Scott, nicely done. I foresee an issue coming in the industry from the client side, which is the decreasing margins. Land values haven't fallen, low interest rates haven't really translated into cheaper debt, and build costs have increased. Is quite the economist. This can lead to a decision to save costs on either professional fees, quality of design, or ultimately the profit. Agree with the ideas, but contractors are always making their margin. I feel developers will be forced to make tough decisions.
I think
it's hard to generalize, but there's pressure all around.
That's it. It's a problem in the industry. I think one thing around that for developers is there's a lot of new angles coming in now with a lot of planning change. The Queen mentioned it in her speech, and Boris has just released this huge restriction, ease of restrictions on so much planning change, and maybe there's margins to be seen there that weren't there before. But I think the conventional route of buying a site with planning and having a full professional team and building it fully, and the costs are going up. They are going up. I got a phone call the other day from a procurement manager at Juice's that plasterboard was going up 12% overnight. So and 12% across that is huge. So costs are going up, and it's a problem, and that's the developer's role, isn't it? Trying to find that margin.
It won't always be like this though. Costs are going up, this year, granted, I think you can write this year off, but we don't know what's going to happen next year. And also technology is changing, so actually our ways of building is different anyway, and is improving all the time with the innovation. I don't know OMC still uses plasterboard, but it won't be surprised until there's other products available. So even though it's a squeeze now, it will force the industry to change, to modernise and to improve, I would assume. So, it won't always be this way. There'll be other ways of doing things, I think. Yeah,
I agree. And I think going back to the input of the professional fees, I think it's our opinion on it on a bigger project is it's such an important item of that development appraisal. Thinking I need to cut costs on my appraisal to get to that land value that I need to buy. no one would ever go
Pay less for the land.
Ideally pay less for the land, but you're not going to say, okay, I'm going to add on 15% of my sales targets to get to that. And quite a common thing is to take that professional design input and go, right, that's the first thing that we can save money on. What we're saying is actually don't do that, because keeping that there might make the project take 3 months shorter than it may have done, but that's 3 months of debt that you're saving as well. So there's loads of different components.
It's a full saving.
It's a full saving.
Yeah. I think, to start without the right team or without being ready. You're constantly chasing your tail. Like you say, it's luck then if your project goes well. Yeah.
Well, on that positive note about costs not always increasing, but technology advancing and costs potentially coming down, I think that seems like a good place to leave it for today. I just want to say thank you to Michelle, and thank you to Arthur, and thank you to everybody who attended. I've been Matt Siddell, and I'll see you on the next one.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye.
So if you enjoyed this video, why not check out some of our other videos? I recently interviewed lots of fantastic people. There's loads of good content in there. Thanks for watching. I hope you enjoyed it. I'll see you in the next video.